this is the interesting thing. Why would the U.S. government work so hard to keep me trapped in Russia rather than allow me to go to a jurisdiction where they would be much freer to operate and much more comfortable, realistically, like France or Germany or Iceland or something like that, if they had even the slightest doubt about my loyalty?
I would assume they just didn't want you to go anywhere, and you happened to be in Moscow. They didn't think it through.
Right. Imagine you're the director of the NSA, or you're the CIA, and you've got this guy out there, and he's the person that you hate the most in the world. And you know all your authorities, you know all your incredible powers, you know even the things that I didn't know with all of my access, right? All the ways you can get people. And they go, you know, we really don't like this guy, we really want to do something about him. Would you rather me be in Moscow or literally anywhere else? Right? And so to me, it's very strange that the government worked quite hard to keep me exiled specifically in Russia. And I've always been a little bit, particularly as years have gone by, and you can't explain it away simply as a mistake of policy back then. They've had time to rectify it. They realize that me being in Russia provides them with an evergreen political attack that doesn't have to be explained. It doesn't have to be justified. Simply the association with Russia is enough for them to call into question my character.
And some Americans would say, really? He went to China? And admittedly, it was Hong Kong and different then, and Russia, these two countries, and there was no other way to get to Latin America except through Russia?
Right, certainly. And this, I mean, this was subject of much debate, and it was, again, borne out. There was a lot of public reporting on this back in 2013 when it was contemporary. The reality is you can't fly from Hong Kong, or at least couldn't fly from Hong Kong at the time, to Latin America without crossing U.S. airspace, unless you went the long way around, right? And so then you do this and you have to go, it's a very short list. What are the non-extradition countries to get from Hong Kong all the way over to South America? And again, it's just building a bridge through the air step by step. And, you know, my whole flight manifest at this point has been made public. There were journalists on the flight that I was ticketed for from Moscow to Havana, taking pictures of my empty seat when I was prevented from boarding. And so, yeah, this has all been looked into, and it's just, to me, it's frustrating, but it's also interesting because I wonder, you know, if they did this intentionally, if they did this strategically, it was really the most brilliant move they made in terms of communications planning that they could have. I'm not sure we can give them that much credit because it very well could have been a moment of panic. But it is, I think, disappointing that all these years later they still haven't rectified it.
And it didn't work out well for you. Obama commuted Chelsea Manning's sentence. She's now running for political office. Politicians say you should be killed.
Yeah. Well, you know, the funny thing is we see that much less now than we did in 2013. The reality is there's sort of a pardon movement going on my behalf. I have not asked for pardon from this president or the prior president, but many others have on my behalf, and I'm tremendously grateful for that and the advocacy that people have brought forward. But excuse me. The thing is, as each year passes, and all of those claims, as you said, you know, they were like, oh, he got people killed, there were agents, you know, there were programs or whatever, all this stuff fell apart, it didn't work, attacks are going to get through. None of it came to pass. And this was exactly the story in the Manning case, you know. Obama could not have commuted Manning's sentence politically, realistically, in this 2013 era, in this 2014 era. But years after, right, when Manning's actions were actually in 2009, 2010, you start getting year after year after year, the fact that what Manning did not harm national security in a material way. It did not harm individuals' lives and livelihood in a material way. All it did is inform the public and embarrass the U.S. government and its partner governments in the case of diplomatic cables. But largely, it was about reputational harm, right? The government had egg on its face, and it retaliates as a result of this. Moreover, you know from reporting on the justice system in other contexts, I think, the government is very interested in what it describes as the deterrent effect. Manning becomes secondary, right? Someone like me or Ellsberg or Drake, any of these people, they become secondary to the point of the government pointing to the rest of their workforce. Even if this person did the right thing, even if they did it carefully, even if they did it in the best way, we don't want you to emulate it. So we are going to come after this person, chase them all the way around the earth in order to set an example.
I hope you get pardoned. It's a little puzzling. The Attorney General says you're a traitor, and the information you peddled, you peddled it around like a commercial merchant.
Yeah.
Which you didn't do. You never tried to get money from it. President Trump in 2013 said they got a lot of information out of this guy. He's a terrible guy who set our country back.
This guy's a bad guy. And, you know, there is still a thing called execution.
This is a bad guy, and there's still a thing called execution. But then 7 years later, a reporter asks him, do you want to give Edward Snowden a pardon? And he says, well, I'm going to look into it.
Do you want to give Edward Snowden a pardon?
Well, I'm going to look at it. I mean, I'm not that aware of the Snowden situation, but I'm going to start looking at it.
Yeah, this is a good example of the distance Donald Trump has traveled from 2013 Trump to 2020 Trump. But also, more generally, when you bring up the case of the Attorney General, who does not seem familiar at all with the basic facts of the case when he's speaking publicly on it, that is a lot of distance historically. A lot of things have happened in between then. And as we start to look at what happened in 2013, less with the heat of the moment and sort of careers on the line, and more dispassionately from a historic context, I think it's clearer and clearer that what I did was the right thing to do. And in fact, public opinion is swinging very heavily toward that side. And in fact, even elite opinion, which is largely turned against individuals working outside of the organization in this kind of way, you will not find a lot of love for whistleblowers in corporate America, in government agencies, in any country in the world, I think. But even there, you are beginning to see people speak in fact, I would say large majority terms, favorably rather than disfavorably. And I think that's because history has a way of exonerating the truth.
In some ways, attitudes switched the other way. President-elect Biden, before he became vice president, was against the spying, this data collection, and said it's very intrusive. We're going to trust the president and vice president to do the right thing. Don't count me in on that.
The real question here is, what do they do with this information that they collect that does not have anything to do with Al-Qaeda? And we're going to trust the president and the vice president of the United States that they're doing the right thing. Don't count me in on that.
But he changed his tune once he was in power.
Yeah, and again, this was the same for President-elect Barack Obama.
Some people say, well, Obama was this raving liberal before, now he's, Dick Cheney.
He tells this very briefly in his memoir. He said, yeah, he was campaigning against mass surveillance. Yeah, it was wrong. Yeah, it shouldn't have been done. It was a problem, so on and so forth. But then he says, after he became president, he realized he was seeing that from the cheap seats. And now Bush's wars were his very in line with his decision to move from investigating Bush-era abuses, things like torture, things like unlawful killing, things like the massive domestic surveillance program that happened under the Bush administration. He didn't investigate them at all. Instead, he said it was important that we look forward, not backwards. And it's this lack of accountability amongst the American political elite. At the same time, we are constantly increasing the level of accountability for ordinary members of the public, right? Particularly when we talk in the context of this mass surveillance. Not only is the government policing you, Twitter is policing you, what you say online. YouTube is locking your channel, whatever. There are people in little police hats everywhere you look. And at the same time, these people with power are excusing their behavior. They are heightening the standard of accountability to which we are held. And to me, I say, isn't this backwards, right? We used to call them public servants, and we were private citizens because we were supposed to know everything about them, and we were all supposed to scrutinize them. And we were private citizens because no one was supposed to know what we were doing. We had no power, we had no influence, and so we were meant to be left alone. But that is increasingly being inverted, and we are under a constant gaze electronically. At the same time, they are permanently sheltered by this fog of unaccountability, and that's by design.
And just to be clear, Twitter and YouTube can't put us in jail.
Yeah, they can't, well, yet, but stay tuned.
Or force you to stay in Moscow. You can't return to America at the moment. You got married in Russia. What's your life in exile like?
Yeah, so my long-term partner, many years, who was with me in the United States, Lindsay Mills, she's also American, and I got married. We are expecting our first child, which is a tremendous stroke of fortune. I'm really excited about it. And this is really all-consuming for us right now. I think it's a scary thing. I've never been through this before, and I think it's even more frightening for her. But the reality is exile as a political weapon is beginning to fail. These conversations, what's happening between you and I today, was a rare and sort of extraordinary thing when it first started happening in my story in the beginning of 2014. But now, due to this global pandemic, it's everywhere all the time. I just had a conversation with Ai Weiwei, who lives in exile from China as a result of his own criticism of his government. And this idea from history that governments used to be able to go, fine, we're just going to divorce you from the public conversation. We're going to silence you through distance. It doesn't work anymore, because even though I put my head down on the pillow far away, I still very much live in the United States, and our child, I think, will hopefully embody the best of all worlds.
You're applying for citizenship in Russia, and some Americans say that's disloyal. That makes me suspicious.
Yeah, I mean, this is part of the same conversation that I think has been intentionally pushed by the government for many years now. The reality is I've been in Russia now for 7 years. I cannot leave. I'm expecting to start a family, and I want my son to not grow up as an outsider. I don't want him to feel like he is born into exile, as I am. I want him to feel at home wherever he is. I don't want my wife to be separated from me because, she doesn't have permanent residence in the same way that I do, particularly when the borders to Russia are closed as they are today. So the only way that my family can be together is for me to do this, and I don't think that's wrong.
A year ago, you released Permanent Record, and the government sued, froze the proceeds.
They sought to, it's true. But the reality is the government's judgment in the case of Permanent Record is not enforceable, certainly not internationally, questionably domestically, and I don't have any assets in the United States. Sort of banking system or whatever that they could pull. So that judgment hasn't had any material effect. But more broadly, I speak publicly. I did before, that was also part of the lawsuit, and I continue to do so today. And I'm very fortunate for the invitations to speak because it's allowed me to live a good life in a difficult situation, and I have no reason to expect that'll change.